the focus of all those documentaries and Hollywood movies. But there's one version of Titanic we have never seen until this morning.
The focus of all those documentaries and Hollywood movies has always been on the Titanic, but there's one version of the story we have never seen until this morning. For the past 111 years, historians have pored over every little detail from the Titanic tragedy, but even after these years of research, there are still a couple of details most people don't know about the Titanic and the disastrous event that made it a historical icon. Join us on this epic journey as we take you through some remarkable images that preserve the history of this momentous event, giving you an in-depth tour of the events that occurred before, during, and after the disaster. In a never-before-seen discovery, we will take you through the contents of an old camera found in the deep ocean, revealing horrifying photos. You won't find skeletons. The bones actually dissolve into solution very rapidly at that depth. A good way to start this exploration would be at the very beginning. Follow us as we trace our steps back to March 31st, 1909, the unforgettable day when the construction of this marvel began in Belfast, Ireland. The shipbuilding company Harland and Wolff undertook the construction of the Titanic, and the designers and engineers at the helm employed all their creativity to make the ship an iconic symbol of maritime engineering. The RMS Titanic was part of 3 Olympic-class ocean liners, which included the RMS Olympic and the HMHS Britannic. Unfortunately, every single ship in the class also met a horrifying tragedy. Although the Olympic sinking remains the most popular, that was probably due to the hype surrounding its construction from the very start. The Titanic gained mass popularity even before all the parts were put together, and everyone eagerly awaited the day when this ocean titan would set sail for the first time. What everyone didn't know was that the first time would also become the last. White Star Line, the company that owned the ships, was in a good place at this time. Business was good, and the future looked very bright. No one could have seen the terrible plot twist that almost wrecked the company coming. These photographs from the early days of construction, before the mammoth of the ocean found its grave in the dark abyss of the North Atlantic Ocean, are like a portal back in time, showcasing the doomed beauty as it towered over every surrounding structure. At the time of its construction, the Titanic was a marvel of engineering. The vision was clear, and the engineers, designers, and craftsmen from all walks of life put their heads together to ensure that everything was done right. With over £3 million available in the purse, no expenses were spared. In case you're thinking £3 million is quite meager for a project that huge, that amount is about £310 million in today's money, still a pretty decent sum. Talk about size, this thing was huge. It measured 882 feet 9 inches in length and had a maximum breadth of 92 feet 6 inches. Her total height, measured from the base of the keel to the top of the bridge, was 104 feet. While those numbers may not fully reflect the sheer size of this ship, these images should help you picture the unrivaled beauty and domineering size that made the Titanic worth the hype. But there's a dark side to this story. The Titanic, it seems, was plagued by the aura of death from the very beginning. Even before the ship set sail, it had been claiming lives in shocking numbers. Over the course of 2 years, 8 workers lost their lives at the construction site, each from strange accidents. On March 31, 1912, the Titanic was finally commissioned. The event caught international attention, as everyone lined up to be the first to set foot on the world's newest marvel. But things were about to go south very quickly, and no one saw it coming. For 2 years, the world waited for the day when the construction of the Titanic would be completed and the behemoth of the high seas would set sail for the first time. On April 10, 1912, before a teeming crowd numbering around 100,000, including spectators and reporters from literally everywhere, the Titanic embarked on its infamous maiden voyage. However, this wasn't the first time the Titanic had been seen on water. The ship had traveled from Belfast, where it was built, to Southampton on April 2, 1912. This maiden voyage was scheduled to transport thousands of people, including some of the wealthiest and most influential men and women of the time, from the shores of Southampton, England, to New York City in the United States. It was an event that captured the attention of the world. No one expected that everything would go sour within a very short period. The maiden voyage was meant to take the passengers through Cherbourg, France, to Queenstown, Ireland, and then on to New York. The return route was supposed to be from New York to Plymouth, then on to Cherbourg, and finally back to Southampton. Here's a quick fun fact for you. Did you know that at the time the Titanic was being prepared to set sail, a coal strike was in effect? The coal that was used to power the ship was actually scavenged from other ships in the White Star Line fleet. Even though the strike ended before the ship set sail, there wasn't enough time to deliver the much-needed coal. The passenger certificate issued to the vessel allowed it to carry a maximum of 3,000 passengers, setting the stage for what would become one of the most tragic maritime disasters in history. The Titanic carried a total of 2,547 people, including 905 first-class passengers, 564 second-class passengers, and 1,134 third-class passengers. At the helm of this massive maritime machine were 944 officers and crew, many of whom ultimately sacrificed their lives to ensure that as many passengers as possible could escape the disaster. As the Titanic prepared to set sail from the harbor, an incident occurred that could have stalled its journey, and perhaps even saved countless lives. As the ship moved out of its stationary position, it displaced an immense volume of water, causing the SS New York, another ship docked in the same yard, to break free from its moorings and swing precariously toward the Titanic. Thousands of spectators watched in horror as the potential disaster unfolded. However, the situation was quickly managed, and soon the Titanic was on its way. Following the sinking of the Titanic, many began to speculate whether this near mishap was a sign from the universe, an ominous warning that troubled waters lay ahead. However, we may never know how events would have unfolded if the Titanic had never left the docks on that fateful day. Photographs from the ship's maiden voyage provide a glimpse into its grandeur and the immense impact it had at the time. These images transport us back in time to the moments preceding one of the most infamous maritime disasters in recorded history. Yet, as the Titanic embarked on its journey, few aboard were aware that trouble had already begun. Deep within the coal bunkers of the ship, a fire was raging. It may seem unbelievable, but the Titanic was on fire even before it set sail. For 10 consecutive days leading up to the ship's departure, a blazing inferno had been burning within the coal bunkers, threatening to engulf them entirely. For over a century, debate has persisted regarding the role this fire may have played in the ship's tragic fate. In one photograph, fire damage can be seen on the hull, suggesting that the ocean liner was destined for disaster from the very start. Reports from the official inquiry conducted after the sinking revealed that workers struggled to contain the coal fire below deck for days on end but were never able to fully extinguish it. While the primary cause of the fire remains elusive, its devastating impact on the structural integrity of the ship is undeniable. Although it has been firmly established that the fire was not the direct cause of the Titanic's sinking, the damage it inflicted played a significant role in how the disaster unfolded. Journalist Sonen Molan, who has dedicated years to unraveling the mysteries surrounding the Titanic, discovered a series of hidden photographs in an attic in England. A careful examination of the ship's hull reveals a distinct, 30-foot-long dark mark, evidence of fire damage. Coincidentally, this was the exact location where the Titanic later collided with the iceberg that sealed its fate. Given these recent discoveries, one cannot help but wonder, could things have turned out differently if the fire had not weakened that section of the ship? Even more baffling is the decision made by the Titanic's officials to set sail despite knowing about the fire and its potential consequences. Was this a case of overconfidence, or a sheer disregard for the safety of those on board? While the answer remains unclear, this crucial detail highlights the complex web of factors that led to the Titanic's demise. The tragedy was not the result of a single catastrophic event but rather a culmination of multiple interwoven failures, each aligning perfectly to produce one of the deadliest maritime disasters in history. Another key player in this century-old tale is the iceberg that brought the Titanic's journey to a swift and tragic end. On the night of April 14, 1912, the Titanic was sailing through the dark Atlantic waters, unaware that an expanse of icebergs lay ahead, icebergs capable of sinking even the so-called unsinkable ship. But where did this iceberg originate, and what do we truly know about its history? Some speculation suggests that the iceberg came from the Jakobshavn Glacier near Disko Bay on the west coast of Greenland. Formed in either 1910 or 1911, It is believed to have drifted southward with the West Greenland current before eventually crossing paths with the Titanic. As Captain Edward John Smith and his crew set sail for New York, they were fully aware that the ice field was larger and had drifted farther south than in previous years. The Titanic had also received multiple warnings from other ships about the hazardous ice conditions in the area. The first warning came from the French ship La Lorraine at approximately 5:46 p.m. on April 12, reporting thick field ice in the exact area where the Titanic would later meet its fate. On April 13, the Titanic encountered the steamer Rappahannock, which was heading east. While it remains uncertain whether this steamer informed the Titanic of the treacherous waters ahead, it is known that the Rappahannock itself had suffered considerable damage from the ice fields, suggesting that the danger was significant. On the very day of the disaster, the Titanic continued to receive multiple reports warning of ice fields, but it ignored every single one of them. The first of these warnings came from the Caronia at approximately 9:12 a.m., cautioning about icebergs, growlers, and vast ice fields directly in the ship's path. However, Captain Smith, confident in the Titanic's abilities, simply acknowledged the message with a brief response of thanks. Then, at approximately 11:47, the Dutch ship Noordam also radioed the Titanic through the Caronia. The Noordam informed Titanic of much ice, warning of the precarious journey that lay ahead. Once again, Captain Smith thanked the ship and shook the message off as if it were nothing. As the day went by, the Titanic received several other warnings and sightings of dangerous icebergs, but they all fell on deaf ears. Eventually, the Titanic crashed into an iceberg and sank, killing over 1,500 passengers and crew members. Now scientists have discovered an old camera found in the deep ocean, which reveals horrifying Titanic photos. Enter Seaman W. Wood, a keen photographer who was captain of the SS Estonian at the time. Just 2 days before the Titanic went down, the captain sighted an iceberg that was so massive he couldn't help but marvel at its sheer size. He took a picture of the iceberg and noted down the coordinates. Coincidentally, the coordinates matched the same place where the Titanic struck an iceberg and sank. Could this be the infamous iceberg that sank the Titanic? Quite possibly, although we may never accurately verify whether this was the exact iceberg that doomed the Titanic. The correct coordinates stand as a testament to the possibility that this was indeed the culprit behind one of the biggest disasters in recorded history. One of the earliest written records of the events that transpired on that fateful night was documented by first-class passenger Dr. Washington Dodge. This letter, which was written by the doctor after he made it onto the Carpathia, has remained one of the most vivid eyewitness accounts that describe the final hours of the Titanic. Dr. Dodge's careless handwriting offers a glimpse into his state of mind at the time he penned his testimony. Dodge was a prominent doctor, banker, and politician from San Francisco who boarded the Titanic from Southampton on the maiden voyage, along with his wife Ruth and his son Washington Dodge Jr. According to Dodge's testimony, the trouble started at around 11:40 when he and his wife were rudely awakened by the impact of the ship colliding with the iceberg. Dodge reported that he immediately sprang to his feet and headed to the deck to obtain information on the damage to ensure the safety of his family, but he was told that there was no danger at all, so he decided to go back to bed. But he wasn't at ease and soon went out again seeking information. It was then that his steward informed him that everyone had been ordered to wear life jackets. At this point, it had become obvious that the situation was disintegrating really fast. Without wasting any time, Dodge and his family quickly ascended to the starboard boat deck, where he was able to secure a spot for his wife and son on Lifeboat 3, which was the second boat launched from that side of the ship. In Dr. Dodge's testimony, he recounted details of bias and mismanagement as the crisis unfolded. One titular example was the fact that most of the lifeboats deployed were half full and could have carried more passengers to safety, saving more lives. Then there was also the rule that necessitated that women and children be rescued first, before any man would be placed in the lifeboat. This also led to many more casualties than necessary, standing as a testament to the unimpressive management of such a terrible crisis. As Fifth Officer Lowe started filling the lifeboats on the starboard side, Dodge was able to secure a spot on one, but it wasn't a smooth ride from there. As the boat was getting lowered into the calm waters, the passengers noticed that they were being lowered directly into the immense volume of water being thrown out of the ship's side by the condenser pump. The great force with which the water was being released was powerful enough to drown the passengers of the lifeboat. Seeing the imminent danger, the men quickly cried out, and luckily for them, the crisis was averted. The doctor's account remains one of the most compelling accounts of what exactly transpired that night in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, offering us a guided perspective into an event whose details continue to be shrouded in mystery. This particular image, recently discovered in the old camera, captures one of the most precarious moments of the disaster as the waters filled the ship's compartment. Everyone scrambled to reach safety, from the old to the young, the rich to the poor. No one was exempt from the dangers. This picture captures the fight for survival during one of the most terrifying moments in human history, and it reminds us of the indefatigable nature of the human spirit and our ability to survive even the worst of situations. The last few hours of the Titanic were counting down as rescue operations were underway to get as many people as possible out of the ship. As they loaded them into lifeboats and sent them into the cold, dark night, there were 2,229 people aboard the Titanic that night, and a little over half of them perished in the disaster. For a ship that carried such a large amount of passengers, it's quite shocking that the Titanic only had 20 lifeboats. Out of the 20, only 18 were in use, and many of these boats were not even filled to capacity. This was due to the widespread fear that the lifeboats could buckle under the weight, further expanding the scale of the tragedy. Then, there's also the question of why many of the lifeboats didn't return to retrieve the passengers. According to reports, many of the officials were scared of being swamped by drowning victims or sucked into the precarious depths by the pressure of the sinking ship, so they didn't return to pick up the helpless passengers, whose lives were eventually lost in the icy depths. Now, here's the tricky part of this lifeboat story. Although many people continue to probe the absence of adequate lifeboats on the Titanic, the truth remains that the ocean liner was built in accordance with the standard safety protocol according to the maritime safety regulations of the time. The vessel was carrying the required number of lifeboats, so it's safe to say that the Titanic was a victim of outdated safety regulations. Even more disconcerting was the revelation that the White Star Line wanted as few lifeboats on the ship as possible, prioritizing aesthetics over the safety of the passengers and crew aboard. According to shipbuilders, the Titanic was supposed to float for much longer in the case of an accident, ensuring that almost everyone on the ship would be rescued before it was too late. But things didn't go as planned, and the Titanic ended up sinking faster than anticipated. Till today, the case of the inadequate lifeboats continues to attract attention and discussions concerning the ethical implications of the decisions that led to the avoidable death of thousands of passengers. As we delve deeper into the enigma surrounding the Titanic tragedy, one question that continues to loom large is why the ship broke into two parts. Follow us as we attempt to break down the events that led to the ship's breakage. Within just minutes of the collision, the ocean liner had already taken on a significant amount of water through the hole in the hull. Remember we talked about this hull earlier and the part that the smoldering fire, which was concealed in the coal bunker, played in the entire tragedy. By this time, most of the passengers were largely aware that the ship would sink, but no one expected it to sink so quickly. As the rapid flooding continued, the breach in the Titanic's hull further accentuated the water flow, and seawater soon flooded the ship, filling countless compartments through the lower decks. This caused a significant imbalance in the weight of the sinking ship. Keep in mind that the Titanic was over 882 feet long. This imbalance, caused by the immense weight of the compartments that were filled with water, put an incredible amount of stress and pressure on the ship's hull, which was already compromised. At about 2:17 a.m., just a little over 2 hours after the initial collision, the Titanic's hull began breaking in half. This split took place between the third and fourth funnels of the ship, which were the giant smokestacks that supported the immense steam engine. The hull was significantly weaker than the other hull parts, and even more concerning was the fact that it was constructed of brittle iron rivets, which would most definitely fail in such a dramatic case. Why did a ship whose construction budget was an open check choose to employ the use of substandard materials? Nobody has been able to figure that out yet. Although we can't really tell whether the breaking in half had anything to do with the rate at which the ship sank, it remains a monumental part of the tragedy. As the crackling sounds of the ship breaking apart echoed into the night, survivors looked back with tears in their eyes as the last tip of the ship disappeared into the icy cold waters of the Atlantic, dragging thousands of souls down with it. As the events of the night unfolded, there was one question on the lips of everyone. Where was Captain Edward John Smith? The role played by the captain during the tragedy has remained a subject of debate for many years, and no concrete conclusions have ever been reached. According to eyewitness reports, Captain Smith was said to have appeared on the bridge of the Titanic just moments after the ocean liner collided with the iceberg. As the worst night of the millionaire captain began, he knew this was the end of the legacy he had built for over 40 years. Everything that was happening was partially his fault. While focusing on the frivolities, Captain Smith had ignored the pressing need for a lifeboat drill and instead directed the time to be spent on unnecessary activities. His decision eventually played a huge role in how everything played out. Had the drill been performed, the crew and passengers would have been better equipped to handle the disaster, and many more lives could have been saved. As the Titanic sank further and further into the deep, dark waters, the captain was said to have been heavily involved in the rescue process. There's even a story about him rescuing a baby from the sinking ship, swimming to deliver the baby to a lifeboat. When the survivors offered him a spot on the boat, he declined, claiming that he would rather perish with the vessel. These tales tell of the remarkable bravery that was exemplified by the captain. But then again, on the other spectrum, there are those who claim that the captain was nowhere to be found as the events of the night unfolded. According to these claims, Captain Smith had abandoned his men in these troubled times when his leadership input could have been invaluable. Whichever version of the story is true, we can't help but wonder at the events that occurred in the last moments of the captain. This also raises another ongoing debate as to whether the captain perished with the ship or made it out alive. According to some wild claims, Captain Smith was said to have gotten out of the tragedy alive and lived the rest of his life on a secluded island, where he lived anonymously. The fact that his body was never found lends some credibility to this theory, although it has never been confirmed, so you should take this with a pinch of salt. Today, Captain Smith's part in the Titanic tragedy is a tale that will be told for centuries to come, but is he a hero or a villain? We'll leave that for you to decide. The discovery of the Titanic wreck happened within just a few days after the Titanic sank. Talk began about finding the wreckage, but there was a problem. This was the early 20th century, and the technology of the time wasn't as advanced as today. Although several simple attempts were made to locate the wreckage, serious attempts were not launched until the second half of the 20th century. The first of the notable ones was undertaken by Robert Ballard in August 1985, when he led a joint effort between the American and French governments from aboard a U.S. Navy research ship known as the S.E. Arch. Using a remote-controlled camera known as the Argo, which traveled some 13,000 feet to the floor of the Atlantic Ocean, they were able to get their first glimpse of the wreckage as it lay at the bottom of the ocean. The ship was seen sitting upright in two parts, marking the first time the Titanic was seen since it disappeared into the watery graves back in 1912. Very few shipwrecks have captivated the world's attention like the Titanic, so much so that even after over 100 years, we can't seem to stop talking about it. Recently, a deep-sea mapping company released the first-ever full-size digital scan of the Titanic, giving us a new view of the world's most famous shipwreck. While there have been numerous expeditions to the wreckage since it was first discovered on September 1, 1985, its sheer size and remote location made it extremely difficult for explorers to fully capture the extent of the ocean liner. But thanks to advanced technology, we can now see the full picture of the wreckage in all of its glory. The technology, which was developed by Mel Unlimited, allowed scientists to map the Titanic in its entirety, from the bow and stern sections to its 3 to 5 mile debris field. It was like making a digital twin of the wreckage, allowing us to peer even deeper into the depths of the ship than we've ever been able to. This new imagery helps convey both the scale of the disaster and a remarkable level of detail. It has even been called the largest underwater scanning project in history and has generated an unprecedented 16 terabytes of data, more than 715,000 still images, and 4K video footage. With this new scanned image, scientists are confident that they will be able to explore certain parts of the wreckage that have been elusive for many years. Now, as we rewrite the lost history of the Titanic disaster piece by piece, we gain new insights into the ship and its tragic story. Thank you for watching this video, and see you in the next one.